I studied the brain for 4 intense years. It was a long time ago. Ever since, I've followed the field passionately. In recent years, I've been tracking brain enhancements, melding advanced electronics with neural tissue. The capabilities that brain enhancements could deliver, and the diseases and debilities they could heal and correct, and the man-made technologies to make it happen, for humanity, all these are important questions. But none of these is a closer to truth question. No, closer to truth looks further ahead, much further, to transhuman brains, to ask closer to truth kinds of questions. What happens to personal identity? Would I still be me? What about moral standing? Would it change? Could my mind be uploaded? Would I live on? What would transhuman brains mean? I'm Robert Lawrence Kuhn, and Closer to Truth is my journey to find out. Transhuman brains are biological brains, sufficiently fused with advanced non-biological materials and super artificial intelligence, AI, to qualify as a new species. Are transhuman brains the future of humanity? What could such brains actually do? I pursue this big question with physicists and neuroscientists, probe their perspectives, assess their ways of thinking. Do they differ? I begin in New York with a physicist who pushes the laws of physics to their limits, Michio Kaku. Michio, if you look to the far future of humanity in terms of the ways that the human brain can be amplified, what's the vision that you see?
Well, first we have to realize that the brain is very primitive and accidental. The accidental brain, for example, means that our eyesight is in the forward direction, but the processing of vision takes place at the rear of the brain. Now, in the future, we will unravel the wiring of the brain, and I think this will take us to a new step in our own evolution, the internet. Internet can send digital signals very rapidly, but eventually we will then monitor thoughts, memories, sensations, feelings, and put them on the internet. Already, we've been able to record simple memories in mice. Next might be Alzheimer's patients, so that Alzheimer's patients will push a button and memories will come surging into their hippocampus. And this means that we may be able to one day have an internet of emotions, feelings. This is going to replace entertainment, communications. For example, the movies had a radical change between the silent movies with Charlie Chaplin and the talkies. Who wanted to see a silent movie where you can hear actors talk? Well, who wants to see the movies when you can feel what the actors and actresses are feeling on the screen?
Does it change the nature of what it means to be human?
It does in some sense. For example, it means that we'll have telepathy. If you looked at pictures of my late colleague, Stephen Hawking, on his right glass, there was a chip. That chip connected his brain through radio signals to a laptop computer, and he could dictate passages which were then typed by computers. So he was basically typing by telepathy. We're just opening up this new field whereby we're beginning to communicate directly with the brain, meaning that telepathy, telekinesis, so-called mind reading, the things you see in the Hollywood movies, we can do some of these things today.
Without violating the laws of physics, as you say.
This is well within the laws of physics. And with the Connectome project, we're going to map all the pathways of the living brain and perhaps even give us a copy of the brain itself.
What would that mean?
But it means that in the future, when you walk into a room, you'll just mentally turn on the internet, mentally scan the internet for the latest news, send emails just by thinking about it, communicate with your loved ones and friends, and boy, you had that great memory, you had that great date last night you want to talk about, whoom, you send the memory of that date to your friend, and they too can gossip about what you just did.
Sure. Is it all good? It seems like some individuality will be lost.
Well, take a look at something like artwork. Artwork, I think, will explode because we can now extract images from the living brain, and a 3D printer will print it out. Architects, designers, artists will love the idea of no more paints and brushes and stuff like that, but simply thinking about it and having it printed out on a 3D printer. Art and design could explode as a consequence.
And if you go 1,000,000 years in the future or 100 million years?
Well, during the Middle Ages, we had something called dualism, where the soul and the body were separate. You died, so went to heaven. Modern science says, bah, humbug, there's only neurons. That's all there is up there. Now we're going back to dualism. We're beginning to realize that we can digitize the mind, separate the mind from the living body. That is, pure consciousness is not necessarily wedded to a three-dimensional physical organic being. And so the idea of dualism is now coming back, that perhaps the soul, or whatever you call the soul, can survive the bodily form, can manifest itself in different ways, and perhaps one day even explore the universe.
Michio has a grand vision of melding machines and humans, our minds linked directly with other minds and with all kinds of physical things. He paints a paradisical portrait of how transhuman brains will radically transform human experience, even human existence, a physicalist dualism. Two obvious questions. Is it really possible? Would it be good? Michio is a techno-optimist. He is sure that it is probable and it will be wonderful. I'm not sure of either. How would a neuroscientist respond? I go to Los Angeles to ask an expert on brain mechanisms of affect, emotion, Antonio Damasio. Antonio, how does your work on affect, on feelings and emotions impact on this techno-optimistic view of the future?
I think it would make it very techno-pessimistic, because I find the possibility, especially when we're dealing with things like uploading one's mind, I find it quite wrong, quite improbable. And I think it has to do with affect. If you discuss affect, which you need to do in order to have a general understanding of a human being, you are inevitably talking about a body. You are inevitably talking about life and regulation of life and some structure that gets represented in nervous system, gets represented in mind, and it is your living body with all its operations. So how you can upload that, it would end up being the uploading of the entire structure, the uploading of the life process with all of its biological regulation. So I find it so absurd that I don't have quite words to deal with that.
Yeah, I'm not saying you can do it tomorrow or in 10 or 100 years away, someday maybe 1,000 years. You'll be able to simulate all of that. So you can simulate the body so it would have the same afferent information going into the central nervous system.
Right, but if you are simulating, what are you doing in relation to the reality of what is or was once an organism with its own life and with its own experiences? That's what I do not understand. So once you talk about simulation, of course I don't have any doubt that you can simulate a tremendous amount of stuff. The question is, how realistic is that going to be in relation to the very particular experience that you and I are having of our own selves right now? I do not see how you're going to create anything that resembles our experience. Although I can say it's a very interesting try, and it does get at some of the aspects, but I would not tell people, look, you're going to live forever, because once you die, you're going to have this continuation, this extension in this other form. I don't think that form is very pleasant to me to contemplate.
Antonio, a neuroscientist, bluntly dismisses mind uploading, the ultimate frontier of transhuman brains. A techno-pessimist, he finds the notion absurd. No physicalist dualism for him. I find myself instinctively siding with Antonio. Maybe it's my common training in neuroscience, maybe it's my aversion to physicalism, which is why I cannot trust my instincts. which is why I go back to a physicist, one whose explorations range from cosmology to the subconscious, Leonard Mlodinow. Leonard, you've dealt with the subconscious in terms of understanding mental processes, and how does that articulate with the concept of transhuman brains?
Your subconscious has a very important role in creating reality. You think that you see me sitting here and you think you know who I am. It's all in your imagination. Your eye doesn't take in the clear image that you perceive. There's several layers of processing in your brain to sharpen that up and to take other data, and it mixes in your expectations, your desires, your past experience, and it gives you a picture. When you judge me as a human individual, the same thing is going on. We're all creating our own reality. So the question is, how could some input from some chips help do that? Mm-hmm. In some ways, the external chips or the computer input that you have could give you a more realistic impression of what's going on.
So what are the implications for that? Would that change the whole nature of what it means to be human?
Oh, I'm sure it would. Yeah, I don't think you could interfere with that process of memory, recall of memories. You wouldn't be a human anymore if you did enough of that. I think you would be some new species. Let's first do the memory chip and the vision and all the, the information chips before we do the chip that changes. Pretty soon, if you were going to do that, just get rid of the brain and just you have the chips.
So can you do that and maintain personal identity? That's the question. People talk about uploading. In principle, is that possible, do you think?
I don't think it's in principle impossible, so I guess I would say it's possible.
If it's in principle possible to upload you and you'd feel like you're your same person, then if we do it once, we could do it twice, right? If we had 5 Leonard Mlodinows uploaded.
That would be a problem. Not for me. I'd like it.
What are the possibilities? I mean, I could list the possibilities. One, that your first-person consciousness is now fractionated, and you're in 5 places. And
No.
You don't like that one? Okay. The other one is that only one of the 5 is the real you.
No.
And you don't like that. No. The other is none of the 5 are the real you, and you're gone.
I don't like any of them. I would go with there's 5 of me at the moment of creation, and then we all
But that's the equivalent of if you were had identical twins at birth. It's the same thing.
But they're not completely for twins. And I'm saying my experiences would also be uploaded, right? So
everything.
It wouldn't just be my body.
No,
it would be all my experiences. So for that moment where it's created, there's 5 right. copies of me. They're all identical.
Right.
And they all feel to each other like life feels to me. And then from that moment on, things are different. They're not in the same chair. One is to the left of the other one, and things start to change.
Sure. Okay, but let's say you're in this seat. We create the system, and now 5 of them are uploaded, and there are 5 there, and there's you. So can we kill you? Kill you because you got 5 there that are all you.
Well, that would be bad news for this one.
Would it be? Would it be? If it's bad news for you, then you don't really think that it's the you that are in those 5, because
no, there's copies of the me. So it would be bad. This one would feel like as a bullet starts to pierce. This particular Leonard would feel really bad about it.
Okay.
The other ones wouldn't really care much. They go, hey, I'm more unique now.
That's one less.
One less.
Len, a physicist, accepts that mind uploading is possible in principle, but he is troubled by the multiplicity of replicas. Troubled he should well be. The question of personal identity is the crux of the matter, and the puzzle of replicas spotlights it. Still, Len allows for brain-mind uploading, consistent with his physicalism. Still, if I were a physicalist, I'd be conflicted. Again, I seek a neuroscientist, one this time with a cognitive focus. I go to Los Angeles, the County Museum of Art, to meet a pioneering investigator of quirks of the brain-mind, V.S. Ramachandran. Rama, what are the kind of issues that a transhuman brain would have to face in order to be truly human?
This is a very tough question because we don't really know what consciousness is and what personal identity is and what gives you your individuality and makes you separate from an identical twin who may have all your brain programs and everything completely identical, point to point, identical with your brain. Is a separate person. He's the same person. If I replace you with him, do you continue in that person? If you replace your brain completely with all the programs downloaded on that machine, would you still exist or not? Right. We don't know the answer to that. It's a metaphysical question so far.
Because if I take your brain, and there's 86 billion neurons, and I replace one, just one, with an electronic diode or whatever, just one, Are you going to be any different? No.
No, but there's a slippery slope argument.
You caught me.
No, you wouldn't, that's right. Yeah, you
Yeah.
wouldn't.
Now, if we place all but one, you probably are going to be different.
Right.
So, what does that imply? With you place one, you're no difference. Place.
And then the question becomes: is it a semantic riddle or is it a legitimate problem about reality and about epistemology? And short of talking to a professional philosopher, and they don't know very much either. I don't know the answer to that.
That's why I'm talking to you.
What if I replace your brain with 10 identical brains? Which one do you continue in?
Right.
After all, your brain gets replaced every few years anyway. The brain has been completely replaced.
Right. Every molecule is different.
Every molecule has been replaced.
Right.
So if it just happens suddenly instead of gradually, it doesn't make any difference. I can create a situation where I one by one replace it in a 1 hour period. Then will you still continue in that person?
Well, if we're being replaced by the same kind of molecules that would be done over 5-6 years or whatever.
But we don't know you're continuous. You just assume that. You may have died and just been reborn, and you just don't know. So there's all these fascinating but unanswerable. The ultimate question of what happens if you're replaced with a completely identical being. As far as the behavior is concerned, nothing happens. You just continue in that being.
Right, of course.
But I say I split it into two. I put two creatures instead of one.
Yeah.
Which one do you continue in both of them then? If I torture one and give pleasure to the other, do they mingle? So these are all unanswerable questions, I think. And you take two views. One view is you don't have our terminology that lacks the focus to spell these out. You don't have a vocabulary, but there is a truth out there. Other views, there are metaphysical questions which you never address by scientific or ordinary.
But there is a real question here, and that is at some future time, some people think that you will be able to upload 100% of the information of your brain into another medium. If we take your brain and we do that, we do it 10 times, and you're still here in those 10 times, those all will say they're you. They'll be just as smart. They can fool your wife and your children. I mean,
Sure.
100% at that moment. But what happens to that first-person experience that you have now?
That's a very good question. And the question is, are there several people or only one person? And the problem is that the numerosity is a concept. We take for granted as an axiom. But the numerosity applies to minds or not, we don't know. We don't know what a mind is. This is why you get caught up in these epistemological riddles.
Yeah.
I'm not saying there is no answer. I'm saying, as far as I can tell, there's no answer. These are genuine philosophical, epistemological questions for which there will never be an answer. Because each of them, mind you, each of the clones you created claims unique and private access to you, one person.
Correct.
So how can they all claim into one person without them all being the same? We know they're not all the same. They're different bodies.
Right.
Only in the realm of functions, maybe numerosity doesn't apply, the rule of numerosity. Maybe one function can exist 5 different places, or 5 functions can exist in one place. I mean, God knows, right?
Maybe God isn't even sure.
He's a comedian that's afraid to perform before an audience that's afraid to laugh. Or God's there, but he's very sadistic. Or he loves practical jokes. Our cosmos is one such practical joke.
Rama lays out the deep conundrum underlying all mind uploading projects. Either we are not yet capable of harmonizing multiplicity of minds with personal identity, or we will never be capable because the question in principle is not answerable. Even so, transhuman brains and transhuman creatures loom just over the horizon. How to frame the coming transformation? What kinds of issues will humanity face? These are the kinds of questions, as I see it, that are the purview of philosophy. I go back to New York to meet the philosopher who transformed thinking about consciousness with his deceptively simple paradigm-shifting phrase, the hard problem, David Chalmers.
Well, there are many paths to, I guess, a transhuman future. One path is upgrading and enhancing humans. So we become things superior to what we were. I mean, in a way, that process is beginning to happen already through our use of technology. My memory is now, in part, loaded on my smartphone. It's taken over functions from my biological memory, even though I haven't had to implant it into the brain. But of course, the next step, maybe at some point, actually, implanting technology into your brain, first through brain-computer interfaces, ultimately perhaps replacing parts of your brain, replacing neurons by silicon devices that might last much longer, might run much faster, ultimately giving us perhaps a form of enhancement and maybe even a form of immortality. The other kind of transhuman future is we design our successors, as it were, artificial intelligences that we create that are not us, but that are made by us.
But that's not us anymore.
That's not us. So it's a very different future. And I think in some ways the first possibility is more attractive to humans because in a sense we're still around. Maybe it's partly artificial, but it's us.
What are some of the issues if and when AI would ever have any moral standing as humans do, or even as the arguments about animals?
So philosophers talk about the expanding moral circle of beings who we acknowledge as having rights, as having moral status. Maybe originally it was just like ourselves and our families and our tribe, but then we gradually expanded. Maybe it got expanded to all of humanity eventually. Now it's been expanded to non-human animals who we largely recognize as having moral status. And the question is, how much further does it expand to artificial intelligence? My view is that the key to morality is consciousness. If a subject has some degree of consciousness, it's at least potentially a moral subject that we ought to acknowledge as something which has interests, which could be harmed, which could be helped. Whereas if there's no consciousness, then ultimately something is a piece of meat. This chair, we don't normally think of it as having moral status because it's not conscious. Artificial intelligence,
right.
The key question is, are they conscious? Some people have been led to speculate that there may be some degree of consciousness already in existing AI systems. The idea is neural networks. You give them positive feedback, reward. You give them negative feedback, and the thought is, well, too much negative feedback, they might be suffering.
You think in principle AI systems can be conscious?
I think once you get AI systems with the kinds of complexity that we do, that mirror, for example, the structure and functioning of the human brain, I don't see any reason in principle why they can't be conscious. I don't see any reason why neurobiology is special compared to, say, silicon. I think what matters is the structure, the patterns, the kinds of information processing they do. I think ultimately we're going to have to admit artificial intelligences into the moral circle. Once we've got AIs that are as complex as us, that we can hold conversations with, that are playing a role in our society, we're going to face that issue of what kind of rights they have, what kind of moral rights they have, what kind of legal rights they have, what their social status is, but that we don't give rights to them. That would be akin to having a slave class. I think that's not a future we want.
Your view certainly would be challenged by some, but it's no issue that if my brain becomes 3/4 AI in the future, what happens then? Because it maintains its consciousness and maintains its moral rights.
I think maybe one way we're going to make this future more palatable in some ways is precisely through cases like this, where there's a combination of, say, biology and silicon inside one being. If we are led to upgrade ourselves, I replace half my brain with silicon, and as someone who is already human, presumably people are going to see this semi-biological, semi-digital creature as worthy of rights, as conscious, and having moral status. And once we start doing that to beings which are partly or wholly silicon who came from a human past, it's going to be hard to resist not granting those rights to beings who have been wholly silicon from the beginning.
Transhuman brains, coming for sure, elicit 3 big questions. 1, can mind uploading maintain personal identity, retaining one's private, first-person subjective experience? 2, can non-biological intelligences be conscious? 3, should non-biological intelligences have moral standing and rights? If I'd be forced, against my will, to answer the 3 questions, I'd utter 3 weak-throated no's. No mind uploading, no non-biological consciousness, no moral rights. To me, the 3 questions are really one question. Is consciousness entirely physical? Thus, my weak no. A curious observation about mind uploading. The 2 physicists are optimists. The 2 neuroscientists are pessimists. What do we make of this? physicists focus on fundamentals of matter. The matter of the brain is nothing special. Neuroscientists focus on the embodied brain and its vast complexities. Thinking and feeling are not reducible to digitization and duplication. The philosopher sides with the physicist in principle, but adds the caveat of consciousness. I'm with Chalmers on the centrality of consciousness, but I'm less confident than he that physical structure and information alone can generate consciousness. Of only this am I really sure. Confirming whether mind uploading could ever convey first-person specific inner conscious experience or not would bring us closer to truth.
For complete interviews and for further information, please visit closertotruth.com.